Hello, my name is Adam, and I'm on a quest to be the most prolific reviewer of all time. And to do that, I review literally everything. That's a bit of an exaggeration because obviously, literally everything would be impossible. But I review a lot of stuff. I review books, movies, plays, podcasts, whatever I want, basically. And today, I'm going to review a sport. And the sport that I am going to review is hockey. And non North American and Europeans might be saying, do you mean ice hockey? And I mean, no, 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 no. We don't do that here. It's hockey. All other forms are adjective plus hockey, road hockey, street hockey, roller hockey, field hockey. Hockey is the stuff that's on ice. Yeah, and I don't even know if because I was thinking about maybe field hockey is younger than hockey, but I don't know. I don't think so. But anyway, not important because nobody in North America says ice hockey. It's just hockey. It's a given that it's on ice. Right. So to review, this is going to be very personal because I'm Canadian, and there is a sort of joke that's a little bit true that hockey is not a sport in Canada, it's more like a religion. So I'm going to be talking a lot about those kind of things in a bit. But to let's pretend you've never seen hockey before. Hockey is a sport that's played on ice, and the dimensions of the ice rink are defined by whatever league you are playing in. So, international rules, the ice rink is a bit bigger than in the NHL, for example. In North America, the ice rink is a bit smaller. But generally, the basic rules of ice hockey are the same all around the world. You have five skaters who are the forwards, and you have two goaltenders. And these skaters can be exchanged, and generally the so imagine there's five forwards, sorry, three forwards and two defensemen. So the two defensemen stay near the, well, I mean, obviously they don't stay all the time, but like imagine there's a face off. So you have three forwards in the front facing another three forwards and then two defensemen standing in front of the goaltender. And these players, because it's really hard to skate all the time, these players can switch, and that's called a shift. So again, it depends on the league and how many players you can actually have. But in the NHL, usually they have four forward lines, and that could be like an offensive line, defensive specialist line, whatever. And then you have like three defensive pairings, and then a goalie and a backup. And they're, they play on skates. They have protective equipment like helmets, visors. Goalies have more equipment, and I wish I had a puck to show you, but I don't. So they shoot this puck around the ice. It's like hard frozen rubber, and it goes really fast. And the kind of criticism of hockey is that it's really hard to follow this because it's not a football. So it's hard, like, it's not you on screen, you see like this tiny black dot basically, but you can see where it is because you follow the action and it goes. So yeah, the idea is that you shoot this point. This is like one of those exercises where you're explaining something really simple and then you realize you've missed a few things. But anyway, so they shoot the puck, and the idea is to put the puck into the opponent's net, and the goaltender and all of the other players are trying to prevent you from doing that. Scores generally depend on the quality of the different teams. And in most leagues, the quality is about the same because there's not necessarily what do you call that? Regulation, not regulation. When in football, where a team is not good enough and they go to a lower league, that just generally doesn't happen in North American hockey. It might happen in European hockey, and again, it depends on the league. But so, for example, the KHL doesn't do that. That's the Continental Hockey League, and the NHL, the National Hockey League, don't do that. KHL is in Russia. National Hockey League is in North America. So the game has 3 periods. Each period is 20 minutes, and then you have a 15-minute intermission. And then again, this next part depends on the rules of the league, but in the NHL, if there is a tie after those 3 periods, there is a 5-minute overtime, and it's 4-on-4 overtime. So basically, it's much more flowing. And then if there's a tie after the overtime, then they have a shootout. And then the points are dependent on whether you won the game in regular time, in extra time, or by shootout. Yeah, that's a controversial topic as well, but I'm focusing on the basics. But there are leagues, I'm sure, where, although I think the NHL is super influential, so the changes that the NHL makes usually are reflected on other leagues as well. But there's probably leagues where you could have a 0-0 tie or 5-5 tie or whatever, and it would be fine. Um, yeah, what else is there to say about the basic rules? Well, I think the big thing that people kind of focus on in hockey is that fighting is not legal, but it's an aspect of the game. And traditionally, fighters have been used to enforce uh, rules or punish violators who did things. Because basically, you have a game which is really, really fast, and you have people hitting each other. Oh, yeah, because it's a contact sport. Forgot to tell you that. It's a contact sport. So basically, if you have the puck and you're going towards the net, other people can hit you with the puck, like body check, and that's completely legal. But there are things you can't do, like you can't target the head, you can't target the knees, you can't slash somebody, you can't poke them in the face. But those things happen. And because they've happened throughout the history of the game, there's been this kind of role, which is an enforcer. And I think that is kind of died out now, but you do have people who still fight and it's still like a part of the game. But you don't have, like, when I was growing up, there were players like Bob Probert. That's the only one I can think of now. But there were people who were only on the roster to fight. That was their entire job. But now you don't have that. You have to have more skill to be on the roster. And if you can fight, that's an advantage. But like if you can score goals, that's much better than being able to fight. So the game is really, I mean, now, like I would say in the early 2000s, like the way the game is played kind of evolves over time. And in the early 80s, it was something called like pond hockey, where you're basically rushing back and forth and trading chances and just hoping that your offense is better than the other guy's offense. And the goaltenders weren't. I mean, they were good, but they didn't have as many systems as they do now. This is kind of a fascinating topic, actually, and I had a whole podcast connected to the history of hockey. But anyway, so what happened is probably the Russians in the early 80s with a guy named Tretiak, they started kind of systematically figuring out how to play the goaltender position. And around the same time, coaches figured out something called the neutral zone trap. So around 2000s, where, teams like New Jersey Devils were winning cups, it was very boring hockey because it was very like there was no flow between there was no flow. But then they had a lockout, I think in 2000, when was that? 2004, 2005, and they lost the NHL season. And when the hockey came back, they needed to do a lot of things to kind of attract new fans and kind of get the old fans back who were really pissed that they had lost an entire year of hockey. And I was particularly pissed because I think the year no, that was after. I think the 2007, the Senators made it to the final, which is my team. Yeah, so now I would say the style also depends on the kind of league that you're watching and the national team that you're watching, but generally it's kind of more about movement and not just like dumping in, rushing to get the puck. That does happen sometimes. But like, for example, if you look at the power play now is not static. Oh, I didn't even mention power play. Okay, what is a power play? Power play is like you get a penalty, you go sit down for like 5 minutes. So the opposite team has 5 players and your team has 4 players, 4 skaters, one goalie. And so the opposite team is usually able to put much more pressure on the team that had gotten the penalty. So usually there are more goals on the penalty power play than regular 5-on-5 skating, which is why overtime is 4-on-4 hockey, because it's more wide, more open space. Yeah. And maybe I think one of the most exciting things for me is pulling the goaltender, because you can do that. So oftentimes when a team is down by 1 and they have like 40 seconds left, they will pull the goaltender to get an extra skater, which means they basically have more ability to attack in the offensive zone. But of course, their net is defenseless. So there's lots of open, that's called an empty net goal when you score a goal like that. And, people have been criticized, like Alexander Ovechkin, for capitalizing on that. But if you ask a goal, like I saw this interview with Brett Hull, who was a leading goal scorer in the 80s and early 90s, and he says he regrets not scoring more and open net goals because he would have had higher statistics. So, yeah, much more flowing game than it used to be, but, that evolves. There's a possibility that it will stop being so flowing now. But I think it also benefits the style of player that we have. So, the best hockey player right now is probably somebody like Connor McDavid, and he plays a very quick style, and basically so when he started, he would take the puck from his end and then rush end to end and score, like Pavel Bure. Pavel Bure was great, man. Yeah, so the Russian Rocket. So I'm trying to like review and give you information about hockey like you don't know anything, but I don't know everything, but I know a lot, so it kind of bleeds into the explanation. So I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so the best hockey players of all time, it depends on what you define as best, because as I said, there were enforcers, there's like goal scorers, playmakers. So probably statistically the best hockey player of all time is still Wayne Gretzky. He doesn't have the most goals anymore. Alexander Ovechkin passed him this year, but the Russian no, it's not called the Russian Rocket. That's Pavel Bure. Ovechkin is the Russian Machine, or the Great Eight. And hockey nicknames are sometimes great, sometimes not great. So Wayne Gretzky is the great one. Yeah, but of course that's also debatable, because hockey is a sport in which you can get injured, and then so statistically the best player of all time is Wayne Gretzky, but then Mario Lemieux, he was probably as talented and bigger than Wayne Gretzky, but he got injured, so his statistics are not as good as Wayne Gretzky's. And then you have the other thing that NHL fans maybe don't want to hear, but you have like players who have like these great careers, and some of which, only they only interact with the NHL for a brief period, like somebody like Jaromir Jagr. So Jaromir Jagr was like a huge star for Pittsburgh, and does have, like, I think statistically, if you counted the number of goals in the NHL, he has something like third or fourth highest. But then if you count the total points in other leagues that he's played in, then it's much higher. And somebody can say, well, the NHL is the best league in the world and you can't really compare apples and oranges, but if you're playing professional hockey, it's kind of the same. Like, I don't know if this is a problem in other sports, but it seems like and I think it's getting better actually. But when I was growing up, there was only the NHL, and sometimes, like, NHL players weren't going to the Olympics until when was that? 2002. So that was the first time that NHL players had gone to the Olympics, or maybe it was 1990. No, 1998 was the first time I think the NHL players went to the Olympics. 2002 was the first time that Canada had won the Olympic gold medal in years, and that was like 50 years or something. That was crazy too, because I remember I was in my apartment and I was alone for whatever reason, and I was listening to that game, the gold medal game, and it had the windows open, and you could hear people like screaming in Canada. You could hear people screaming and yelling, and it was like we won the World Cup. Like, because for Canada, the Olympics in hockey is like the World Cup, because obviously we have a chance to win in hockey. We don't have a chance to win in football. Yeah, so, and I think it's getting better now, the understanding of more international hockey, because like I was watching on television over the holiday, I was watching the Spengler Cup, which is an invitational tournament for different teams. Like, it's been going on for like 70 years or something, and it's in Davos, which is a town in Switzerland. And so, if you think about it, like, if I were to ask hockey fans, what is the most successful franchise of all time, hockey franchise of all time, they'd probably say the Montreal Canadiens, because the Montreal Canadiens have won 24 Stanley Cups, which is 24, I think, 24, 25, the most Stanley Cups, which is crazy, really crazy. But HC Davos, their hockey club, has won 30 championships in their league. And you might say, well, that's two different leagues, right? And it is two different leagues, but 30 championships is domination, right? That is like a crazy amount. And so that was on television. The World Juniors were on television, but they've been on television for like ever. But also you had like NHL games. You also had Continental Hockey League. Championship hockey league. So that's hard to explain, but so as you have the Champions League for football, there's kind of like the Champions League for hockey, although it's not so popular, but there is something like that. And if you know how, it's really easy also to watch Continental Hockey, KHL, from Russia. And it's not bad also. And also, the past few years, I've been able to watch PWHL, so Professional Women's Hockey League. And I think if you like hockey, like, there is this thing that people will say, well, the NHL is better. And probably if you took any NHL team in the league. I'm not so sure about that because there's lots of teams now, but like I think if you took like the lowest NHL team and you played them against any other professional hockey team, like I'm sure if you took, I don't know what the worst hockey team is now in the NHL, but like if you took the Utah Mammoth and you had them play HC Davos, probably they would win, right? And if you took the Mammoth and you, I don't even know if the Mammoth are the worst hockey team in the NHL. So sorry, Mammoth fans, if you think that they are, if they are good or not, I don't know. But if you took them and they played the, the champions of the PWHL, of course they would win. And I saw this argument like about the WNBA, like, oh, it's dumb because men would beat them. And, it's just a different style of hockey. So KHL style is different from CHL style. And there's two CHLs. There's Canadian Hockey League and the Champions Hockey League. So I'm talking about Champions Hockey League. And, it's different from NHL. And I think NHL is probably like the best physical hockey league. But I think that the the CHL is probably the most interesting European league because you have teams that compete from various leagues, so it's not just one kind of style. So it's kind of interesting. And I think that's the amazing part about hockey nowadays is that you can like it's an international sport, but it's still not as popular as something like football. And the reason I think it's not as popular as football, it has to do with the weather, of course, but it also has to do with the fact that, unfortunately, hockey is getting more and more expensive. It's like the sport of like people who have a lot of money, because sticks can be hundreds of dollars now. And I was thinking about, so I wanted to do a review of hockey, and I was thinking about my experience as a Canadian growing up. Played pond hockey a couple of times, even though I couldn't skate very well. And my parents went through this phase where they wanted me and my brother to do sports. And so there probably was like the thought that I could play hockey because there was a hockey team locally. But it was too expensive then because you need skates, you need sticks, you need helmets, you need all of this stuff, protection, whatever. And that was in the early 80s. So now it's just gotten more and more expensive. And you could get like a normal stick. I don't know what it would cost, but like my parents thought it was expensive back then, but it wasn't that expensive because actually you could buy road hockey sticks. You could buy hockey sticks pretty cheaply, right? But now even the sticks are expensive. So I think that's causing, and the sticks break. So I think that's causing a lot of problems for people and kind of causing a lot of problems for adopting the sport. Although I think in North America they're doing a good job with that. And I think maybe one thing that kind of uh, so if I was going to say what could be done to improve the popularity of hockey, I would say like one thing would help. If you look at football, like I just got the ability to have television, live television again, and flipping through random um, American channels, like sport, if they're playing sports at this time, like 95% it's going to be American football and then 5% some other sport. So football is just so dominant. And the, I think partly it's because college football is also really dominant in the United States. But I think for the NFL, the reason it's dominant is because it is really easy to follow your team, right? So your team has like what 12 games, and you have 12 games, and then you have a super big game at the end. And I think People really love the NHL format of playoffs because you have, 7 games and there's lots of stories, and it's super, super hard to win the Stanley Cup. But I'm sure it's hard to win a Super Bowl too because, you have 12 games, you have like a limited time frame to win. But I think if there were a sort of Super Bowl of hockey, I think that would be a real selling point. And one thing I didn't mention is the Stanley Cup. The Stanley Cup was kind of taken over by the NHL, but it was given as by Lord Stanley in the late 1800s as a prize for the best hockey club in Canada, and he didn't specify whether it was professional or amateur, or I think maybe he even did say it was amateur hockey. But then this was but there wasn't so big deal. Like there wasn't really professional sports back then, so obviously it was for amateurs. And the the there were different leagues that were competing in the beginning of hockey for the Stanley Cup. And then those leagues kind of fell away, and the NHL kind of was left with the Stanley Cup. And then when there was this lockout that I mentioned previously, there was this idea of like other teams competing for the Stanley Cup because the NHL wasn't. And I don't think this would happen in a million years because I think the logistics are really difficult because you only have like one independent hockey league in Canada, men's hockey league, which is the NHL, and the American Hockey League is dependent on the NHL, and all of those smaller leagues like the ECHL are dependent on the NHL as well. So you couldn't have like I think what I'm going towards is I think it would be great if there was a Memorial Cup style hockey tournament. The Memorial Cup is the championship for uh, junior hockey in Canada. So basically, the OHL, the QMJHL, and the WHL, the Western Hockey League. And I think there's another one, or maybe it's only those three. They have a tournament where one city hosts, and they have a buy into the tournament, and then the champions of those three leagues kind of compete to see who is the best team in Canadian junior hockey. So it would be great if that, and I think they wouldn't do this because, as I said, it's so hard to win the Stanley Cup in the NHL. But it would be great if you had like a tournament like that where you had professional hockey teams at the end of the season try to fight for the Stanley Cup, um, like they have with the Spengler Cup, but like real, you know. And I think the NHL won't do that because the Stanley Cup is so entwined in their history and their legacy. And I've been talking like generally, but I haven't really spoken personally how I feel about hockey. And I think that hockey it's always been part of my life, but it's been complicated because when I was younger, you needed to have your own favorite hockey team. Like it was just the way it was. You needed to pick one. So, and usually where I grew up, it was the Maple Leafs or the Red Wings. And to be different, I chose the the Canucks. And the Canucks went on this like great run in 1994, and they almost won the Stanley Cup, but they lost to Mark Messier's Rangers. And that was the era of Pavel Bure and the skate logo, and great color scheme, and Kirk McLean. And I sent to Kirk McLean. Uh, I asked for his autograph, and I got it. Who was the goaltender? Number one, and it was just such a great style, like black, the skate logo, his mask, huge guy in my imagination. So yeah, but then after that, I maybe kind of lost the enthusiasm for hockey because it's always on in Canada. There's always a game during the season, and then I think in the late 90s and early 2000s, I was, well, first of all, my parents, so the Senators, they came into the league in 1992, and I told my mom I thought that the logo was cool, so she started buying me Senators stuff like I was a fan or something. I had like this Senators blanket. Oh, that would be cool if I still had it, but I don't. Yeah, so I kind of got the reputation of being a Senators fan, but I didn't really pay much attention to what was going on in hockey. And then I was living in Peterborough, Ontario, and I, I took out a library membership, and I really like reading nonfiction, and I started reading biographies of different people. And so I was like, okay, I'll read a hockey biography. And I don't even remember who it was, but I remember the thing that got me back into hockey was the actual stories behind it, because there's so much, wild and crazy stories connected to hockey. And I had eventually a history of hockey history podcast where I would tell you all of the crazy stories about Frank McGee and stuff. So I've always kind of loved that. And so I was following hockey more. And as I said, I created a podcast maybe around 2009, around there. And I had it for a few years. But I think the thing that kind of got me, because I like the sport, I like watching the sport, but I think it really, I mean, probably it's the same with other sports in other countries too, but I think in Canada, it seems sometimes the sport is more important than the people who play it, you know? And there's all of this stuff about concussions in hockey, because obviously it's a physical sport and you can be brain damaged. So that's not great. And there's also this sort of culture of abuse that not every hockey player was exposed to, but like there was this thing um, in and I think that there was a World Junior team. Speaking of the World Juniors, I don't remember what year, but they basically were accused of assaulting women, and there was a bit of a cover up about that, and then they had a trial, and then they were found not guilty, but then there was a cover up. So how do you know if they're guilty or not guilty? So as I said, I think in Canada, like, because there's so much money involved in hockey, that I think that sometimes that money kind of outweighs the actual sport and the actual people who play it. And it's kind of like uh, just an example of this is, so I told you in 2007 um, the Ottawa Senators made it to the Stanley Cup final and they lost to the Anaheim Ducks. But so if you think about random people from those, and of course 2007 was, wow, it's nearly 20 years ago. So clearly they still wouldn't be playing hockey, but like some of those people are completely forgotten now. And, I could remember them like I'm like Mahalik was one a guy, and I could remember like the third line, fourth line, the goalie, like Pascal Leclerc. I'm not sure. I don't think no. Who was the guy? Who was the guy? Roy something. Roy. But so there are these guys who have all of this pressure, but their careers are like so short, and I think that's also a sad part about hockey, because the careers are really really short. Yeah, so people will come and set the league ablaze for a little bit, and then they'll be forgotten. It's because somebody else will come along. Yeah, so I have mixed feelings about it. I do still love the game. I think that it's really like, if I see a game on TV, I might want to do something else, but I'm always like, yeah, yeah, oh, okay, I'm watching it. So I do love it. I do love it, even though it does have problems. But other sports have other problems as well. And in comparison to other things, like I was watching this documentary that I did a review of recently called 2,000 Meters to Andrivka, and I so basically hockey is much less important than things that are going on in the world, like the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all of that stuff. But if somebody dies in hockey, it's an accident usually. And hockey does have a toll on people, and it's not a perfect sport, but it's a sport. It's a game that people play for fun. And I think if people were more invested in sports than actual military conflict, then I think it would be great. Because, there were hockey teams in eastern Ukraine. So why not have like a hockey tournament to decide where they go, or like a realistic referendum? But, you know, I don't know. What do you think? What is your favorite sport? What do you think about hockey? Put your thoughts in the comments. Yeah, I'm trying to get to 250 subscribers by the end of January. I believe I have 223 or something like that. So I think it's quite possible. Just leave your, just subscribe. And if you like what I do, like the video and leave your comments in the comment section, because that really does help the analytics of YouTube decide to push the videos to other people. All right, I've been rambling for 36 minutes about hockey. Although, honestly, I could talk a lot longer, but I'm going to stop now. Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.